Hello, it's Jay back with Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. This time, Chapter 5, Living in Line, which is all about the expressive power of art. Um, that can emotions be made visible? And him starting off by showing a lot of very kind of abstract images and saying, like, is this intimacy, is this madness, is this pride, is this anxiety? um and it's the idea that a picture can evoke an emotional or sensual response in the viewer is vital to the art of comics, and probably to the vital to the to the idea of painting, of film, that all that stuff of, like, it's going to evoke a a specific emotion, or a emotion in the viewer. And art historians have generally held that while painters, musicians, and poets have grappled with ideas, practitioners of low arts of comics have remained blissfully ignorant of them. But have they? Which is, it's that downtrodden lower thing, which, as a fan of science fiction and fantasy and of comics, I can get. He makes a strong case for, various different, he shows various different artist styles, and talks about their style and what each of them perhaps was trying to convey. We've got one here of Kirby with a thing of Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, saying, in the mid 1960s, when the average Marvel reader was pre-adolescence, popular inkers used dynamic but friendly lines, a la thing. And then when Marvel's fan base grew into the anxieties of the adolescents, the hostile, jagged lines of Rob Liefeld struck a more responsive chord. So, various explanations. It's maybe a little bit on the reductive side, but I mean, it's like, it's the textbook, so you gotta kind of paint with the broad stroke here. um so and so he goes from that of, like, okay, but for comics particularly, there's had to be develop a certain kind of a visual vocabulary, a visual thing of symbols for stuff. He shows the example of, okay, I'm smoking a pipe, and we represent a pipe smoke by these two little lines, maybe a little puff there, and it's like, oh, cough, cough, and he's shaking, and the eyes are bugged out. That is all kind of expressive things that are conventions. That's not actually what a person looks like when they're smoking. That's not what smoke actually looks like. Or, here's another one of, oh, stinky trash, which we have a couple lines. We have a couple of very abstract flies, and indeed he shows what those abstract flies look like. It's a dot with a couple of brackets, basically. But we've that there's various things that develop: the puff, the, oh, I'm in love, oh, ooh, I'm zipping away, it's like, ow, that hurts, and, like, oh, I probably knocked on the head, oh, I'm drunk. And that, I think, is a ghost reaching for a key. I'm not quite sure, maybe it's a ghost reaching for a key. um but saying that there are all these kind of symbology that comics has developed to kind of express emotions. And also saying that, like, the relative isolation of Japan, they developed, which is now far more familiar to Western readers, but their own kind of visual vocabulary for anger, dementia, sleep, and the ever-present shooting blood out of your nose for lust, which is like, which, yeah, you look at it from the outside, that seems bizarre, but I'm sure a lot of our things are, a lot of our symbology is also thing. So, and so, saying, like, there's how cartoonists and artists in general use backgrounds to express the emotions. It becomes a subjective expression of emotion, or of the mood of the story. Various things like that. And also how we use the word balloon, itself being another thing to use, like, timber, you got jagged little word balloon, versus, like, arg, or like, oh, it's you dripping with condensation, condescension. It's like, oh, it's you. It's like these things that actually they express, they're visual things that are expressing something. That in that case for word balloon, the tone of voice. Also saying that within comics, not it's for majority of comics, not all comics, majority of comics, there's that interplay of words that maybe slightly clarify or bounce off of the image on the screen, but that's going to be for the next chapter. So in this chapter, we've dealt with the invisible worlds of senses and emotion, but in fact, all aspects of comics show it to be an art of the invisible. What you see is seldom what you get if all you're seeing even now is just ink and paper. So yes, comics has developed this thing, but it's not just the ink on the paper, it's the conventions that have built up over time that allow us to read this, which is why maybe if you're somebody who had never read a comic before in your life, it would seem more like, what are those weird lines that are of this guy punching? Why are there weird lines tracing off of him? Where he's like, see, you're only seeing the ink. You're not seeing what that means. And that, of course, that goes back to an earlier chapter. But what if he's got weird kind of shading on his thing and his eyes are bugging out, or his tongue is hanging down to his feet. It's like, that means something to a comic reader, which to somebody else would be just like, okay, that's grotesque. Nobody has a tongue that long. It's weird. What's going on here? So it's how pictures are able to show emotions, but also how the pictures are hooked with kind of the conventions of the shared language that we have, as much as we have a shared, when I can read English, therefore, and I know, and I've also read, like I've read Shakespeare, so when I can read these strange markings on the paper, I can read them and say that these translate into words. And if someone says my love is like a red rose, I know that they're referencing Shakespeare in the thing. So I know kind of conventions. If a guy's standing below a balcony and looking up and adoringly, I know what that is a reference to in the conventions, or what the hero and the protagonist and all this stuff means in prose. There is equal kind of language and history. Well, not equal, because it's a younger art form in something like comics is a younger art form that has still has a fairly rapidly growing language to it in just the image. So that said, we'll be going on to chapter 6, which is show and tell, which is going to be the image and the words that go with it, showing and also telling, maybe. And maybe how the best comics probably avoid the showing and the telling. Maybe. We shall see. All right. I've been Jay. More videos later.